It is my assignment to talk about equipping men. And this talk and this sermon, if you would, takes on a unique meaning because of the circumstances in which we find ourselves in our world. Yes, we are in the midst of a global health pandemic. In the United States alone, nearly 215,000 people have lost their lives to the coronavirus. Many of you in your own churches, just like us, have experienced the sting of death because of COVID-19. Perhaps some members of your family or your friends or your coworkers or your loved ones have contracted this virus and you have seen its devastating effects. And in the midst of all of this, we still have to wrestle with the pandemic of racism and bigotry and sexism and hatred and so many other phobias and isms in our world. In the midst of all of this, we are dealing with one of the most contentious presidential elections of our time. In the midst of all of that, we still have to wrestle with what it means to be men and what it means to be a part of the body of Christ. And so, in spite of all that we see, what does it mean to be equipped to do the work of the church, to do the work of ministry, to carry out the mission of the United Methodist Church, to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world? And as you are watching this, to every man, to every brother of mine who is watching this, God has called you to be the change and to be the difference maker that you want to see in the world. And in Acts chapter 16, we see two powerful prophets of God who are in less than desired circumstances call on the name of the Lord, and God shows up. The context of Acts chapter 16 actually begins with a separation. It was at the end of chapter 15 that Paul says to Barnabas, let's go back to all of the cities that we have previously preached in to check in on the saints. And Barnabas agrees, except he wants John Mark to go with him. Paul refuses because John Mark had previously abandoned them in Pamphylia. And so their disagreement was so severe that it ended up in a separation between Barnabas and John Mark and Paul. Barnabas and John Mark go to Cyprus, and Paul chooses Silas, and they travel to Syria and Cilicia. What does this tell me? It tells me first that if you're talking about being equipped as a man, you've got to realize that God will enable you, will enable me to go through seasons of relationships, especially with other like-minded men. That there are some men you know who perhaps you started off with and maybe you were friends and you're no longer speaking, you're no longer friends. I want to tell you that God will allow seasons of relationships to come and go. And there are some of you that can testify right about here that there have been some seasons of friendships that have been good, and there have been some seasons that have ended, but you thank God for those God-ordained relationships.